Contingencies by A.R. Kavli. I huddled in my black raincoat. It wasn't particularly cold outside, but I felt the need to hide in its dark folds whenever I went anywhere. Any face that turned my way for more than a second was suspect, winding up my fight-or-flight instinct like an old watch, ready to spring apart. But the bustling, jostling crowd was pensive tonight. No one looked much farther than their own shuffling feet. That suited me just fine. The wind howled between the skyscrapers of New Columbia. It curled in angry torrents down the streets and blasted me in the face. Squinting didn't help. The toxins were heavy in the air today and stung my eyes until they watered. The filter mask only covered my nose and mouth, and I could tell by the metallic taste on my tongue that the filter was overdue for replacement. I remembered my old '57 Zambrath fondly. It was one of the first models of automobiles to come with a hermetically sealed cabin and advanced full-spectrum filtration. I missed that car, and not just for the clean air. The crowd pressed in on every side, and I kept my hands pressed over the hacked hand comp in my pocket. No need to worry about pickpockets with the old Zambrath, and it was just about carjack-proof, too. But criminals like me weren't allowed private transportation permits. And given that I was still acting in ways not becoming of a proper citizen of the Union, the mandated vehicular compliance protocols of any car these days would lock me in and deliver me to the nearest Department of Safety barracks. You know, to keep me safe. Like they keep everyone else safe. Because you can't argue against safety. I ducked into a dark alley, hand on my pulsar. In the labyrinthine traces of New Columbia, getting attacked by a benzene junkie or a brain scalper was more likely than finding a cop. I mean, a safety patrol specialist. As I twisted and turned between buildings, I only came across listless drunkards and vagrants. They didn't even look up at me. Looking up these days could get someone burned down. I stopped in front of the graffiti-covered door to my lab and scanned the area. Seeing no one, I shoved my thumb into a nearby crack in the wall. When the reader verified my thumbprint, the door clicked open and I slipped inside. The last place had a retinal scanner, but the jackboots destroyed it in the raid, and retinal scanners were expensive. Everything was in order. No break-ins overnight, no line of safety specialists with pulsars drawn waiting for me to show up. Just my ragged assortment of servers, analysis benches, computer stations, and Paul typing away. And the proto-AI core in the shielded safe. The raison d'etre for everything else. The only reason I had for living. Next to it was a black market Twinkie that had cost me dearly. Paul looked up at me with wide eyes and reached for the pulsar next to him. "Calm down," I said. "You'd already be dead anyway." He smiled in that lopsided way that made him look like he was your best buddy. And in my case, it was the truth. "I was just testing you. I could have dropped you seconds ago. How'd last night's run go?" Paul stood and strode over to the stack of electronics and wiring we'd set up as the simulation station. I could tell by the spring in his step it was good news. "You've got to see this." Paul accessed last night's batch file and opened the log to the relevant sector. I could have done it just as easily, but I let him work out some of that excitement. Paul went to his toy-strewn desk and began working on another project. He claimed the toys helped him concentrate during the long hours of coding. He played with them during the downtime that comes with running diagnostics. I never judged him for it. If he ever found the evidence of my occasional use of them, Paul said nothing. I sunk into the old chair I had found in the street 2 months back. It smelled of mold and was held together by bonding tape as much as anything. But it was comfortable. At this point in the trials, we were well past the point of just skimming reports for test results. It took me over an hour to read, cross-reference, and analyze the data. Paul was right. I had to see this. We had reached the next development threshold. I felt the smile spreading across my face. Springing to my feet, I went to Paul's desk and slapped his shoulder. "It's here, right here. You're a miracle worker." He looked away and spun a model space station around on his desk. "Too true. I'm just trying to get my Twinkie." "I think it won't be long. Hands off until I say so." "Fine. No cheating." "I don't even have the code, Mom." I laughed and patted Paul on the back again. It was nice to have a friend. There weren't many in my world. I hadn't laughed often since fleeing the university years ago, half a step ahead of a squad of jackboots. The Union doesn't like unauthorized science any more than it likes unauthorized social commentary. It enjoyed exercising its own authority, though. Paul waved as he left an hour later, and I spent the rest of the night integrating the new findings into the next testing matrix. After a few false starts and a frustrating hour tracking down a coding syntax error, the matrix was running. We were close. So close. If I hadn't stumbled across Paul, I'd be at least a year behind. He wasn't an AI man, but his interface systems were elegant and robust. And he was funny in a doofy klutz sort of way. Most importantly, he hated the Union as much as I did. And we both knew what the science czar would do with the AI core. Well, we at least knew they wouldn't do anything good with it. But I suspected they already had some black AI boxes tucked away in Geneva anyway. Maybe the Union just didn't like competition. I had spent a lifetime on the run, trying to puzzle out what the Union really was. Beyond the absolute control that was the goal of all governments up to this point, that is. Finally, I determined there was no way to know without getting into the dark cabal that had to be at the center of things. No thanks. I rubbed my eyes and realized I'd fallen asleep. There wasn't much to do during an initial run except wait, so I grabbed up my stuff, locked the lab down, and stepped into the early morning darkness. This was no time to be walking around groggy, so I slapped myself several times before winding my way out of the area. Never use the same path to come and go. The streets were almost empty, and the safety drones were on a lazy patrol protocol, too high to get a good look at me. It had grown cold, so I hunched into my coat for warmth and anonymity. I was back in the shanty I rented from the local street gang, and crashed so hard the roaches crawling on my face didn't even wake me up tonight. When I awoke, it was to nearby screams and gunshots. My brain was sleep-foggy, and I sat up trying to process what was going on. By the time I realized I should get down, it was quiet again. I drew my pulsar with one hand and patted my pockets with the other to make sure nothing had slipped out as I slept. I've had to jump out of too many windows to unpack. The door burst open and 3 tattooed cyborgs aimed their pistols at me. They stopped when they saw my pulsar pointed back at them. I squinted against the intruding sunlight and tried shading my eyes with my other hand. "Get out," one said. "This place is under new management." "I'm gone," I said without lowering my weapon. They backed out, and I followed. 3 of my former landlords were sprawled in puddles of blood. I fled down the nearest alley without turning my back. The cyborgs didn't follow. I hated staying in my labs. Aside from being hot, and usually crammed full of whatever parts I could scavenge, they usually got raided first. We piped the data off to other servers scattered around the sector, and the labs were easier to rebuild than my brain would be if they ever caught me. Then I couldn't remember if I'd reconfigured the collection node for the new test matrix. I had dozed off last night and left without doing my normal checks. Sloppy. If not, the first test run's data wouldn't have been recorded. Sounded like it was time to go back to the lab. It was hours before my normal arrival, so I opened a quick comlink with Paul to keep him from really shooting me. "I'm coming in. I think I screwed up the run." Paul's voice sounded panicked. "I can fix it. What do you need done?" "I'll get it. I sort of got evicted this morning anyway." "Oh well, that's some sparkly rainbow news." I stopped in my tracks. A scrawny man in dingy red athletic wraps ran into me and cursed as he shouldered his way past. I pushed my way to the wall to get out of the torrent of reeking pedestrians. Not that I was smelling too fresh. "It's all good here. I'll see you later." I dropped the connection and activated the burner software in the hand comp and tossed it down the nearest sewer grate. Paul had given the warning phrase. The lab was compromised, and that meant they probably had him too. I remained alive and free all these years by ruthlessly guarding my safety. I didn't take chances. I looked out for number one, because no one I knew of could do what I was doing. It would take an aggressive, true AI to release the Union's stranglehold on the world. It fell to me at this point in history. Otherwise, I'd have gone to an education camp and enjoyed clean sheets and food without roach bits in it. Paul would eventually talk, and I'd have to run to another sector and rebuild. At least that's what I would have done. What I should do. But as I turned to go, I thought of Paul. He was more than an accomplice, more than a buddy even. We'd become good friends in a world where they were as rare as an honest civic official. I couldn't walk away. I tried twice, and on the third attempt I put my hand on my pulsar and ran to the lab. The path I took was too confusing even for me. I got lost, twice. But the final alley came out well away from the door to the lab, and I could see it, and most of the places a squad of goons would wait to haul me off. Nothing. No blast damage, no trampling of booted feet, no security bots. I watched the area for 10 minutes before drawing my pulsar and sneaking to the door. I listened and heard nothing. With a final look for hidden drones or cameras, I jammed my thumb in the hole and dove through the door. I came up at the ready. There was no one here. It took mere seconds to sweep my pulsar over every corner of the room. Not many places to hide in the lab. I examined the room more closely. There were no signs of a struggle. No cops. No kicked-over equipment. No pulsar burns. No blood. No Paul. And no Proto-AI core. The vault stood open and empty. I holstered my pulsar and went to the system computer. The screen flashed the same messages over and over in cheery letters. Access granted. A quick scan of the user log showed the password had been input directly. No hacking involved. Paul had opened the vault and taken the core. And his Twinkie. Had he taken the AI core to the science czar or to a rival black market tech dealer? It had to be a double cross. If Paul had done it under duress, the jackboots would still be here waiting. There would be signs of a raid. There would be blood. I muttered curses under my breath and started scrubbing the data. It seemed I had reconfigured the node properly and took the data from the test. That was something. For the first time in a long time, I didn't care about the AI. Paul, my so-called friend, had stabbed me in the back. I could see it now. He was in the middle of stealing the core when I'd called. He wasn't expecting me early and used the warning phrase to keep me away until he had what he wanted. It worked. Paul was a smart one. I left the computer scrubbing program to its business and walked to Paul's desk. The model space station was a perfect replica, down to its access panels, working lights, and rotating antenna dishes. Paul said he'd spent half a month's salary to win it in auction. He used to stare in the tiny portals and talk to imaginary astronauts inside. I think he pretended to be inside with them. I pretended Paul was inside with them as I smashed it on the floor. It shattered into highly detailed pieces. A case of explosive decompression was just what Paul needed. He must have turned it over to the science czar. I should have known. I didn't want to believe Paul would do such a thing, or how stupid I'd been. And he was no mole. If so, the cops would be here. No, he'd bent over for the Union. An antique toy robot, chromed and smiling, whined in its death throes when I hurled it against the wall. It wasn't as satisfying as I'd hoped. How could I have gotten him so wrong? I knew he was eccentric, but he hated the Union as much as I did. At least I thought he did. Maybe it was still true, but they made an offer he couldn't refuse. Some say phosphorus smells like garlic, but it reminds me more of the old matchsticks I played with as a naughty child. It was my own special mix, and I spread the powder around the room, making sure to cover the servers as the disks inside were erasing, formatting, and shredding the digital data. Paul was smart. He'd probably taken copies, had possibly been sharing with the Union for some time. But it was all I could do. The only thing worse than having to start over was letting it fall into the hands of the Union. The empty vault stared at me. Vault might be an overstatement, but despite its small size, it would have been nearly impossible to access without lots of time and the skills to hack it. The shelf where the AI protocore and the black market Twinkie had been stored for over a year was empty. The Twinkie was for Paul, a junk food carrot, so to speak. It cost me a ton of credits, but Paul's work was worth it. Now he'd stolen my life's work and his prize. Paul twisted that Twinkie in my back. For the Union. I set the timer on the chemical pack that would set off the phosphorus and ran. By the time I melted into the crowd on 75th Street, I was panting hard. For the years we'd been true friends, and for the advancement in my work that was only possible because of him, I truly hoped Paul enjoyed that Twinkie. If he ate it quickly, he should be able to enjoy the last bite before the nanites in the creamy filling liquefied his guts. I told him no cheating. The life of a criminal is a life of contingencies.